What happened in that intersection in Wake Up? Anybody see what happened at the intersection? What kind of accident? I didn't see it. Everybody signed in?
I can't, but I just don't get it.
So post sign up in the back, so make sure you get that. Folks will need it.
That's the one that went on. Has everybody who's sworn signed the two signing sheet? Even outside agents, your name should be on here because I'll submit them to the first sheet.
I'm sitting through it today. Good to see you guys. So you're going to handle the introduction? Thanks for coming back.
So I did want to make sure everyone has a shorter booklet. No? Okay. So my name is Andre Koen, and and we're going to spend the next 2 hours kind of talking about diversity and inclusion stuff. We'll talk a little bit about implicit bias and some cultural competence pieces. So we'll spend the time doing that. I do want you to know that I am my father's son. I am my father's son. So in 1968, something very traumatic happened in the life of my father as well as the life in the country. And what kinds of things, or what one thing might have been a major impact in my father's life in 1968? For some of you, that may be ancient history. But in 1968, what one event may have had a pretty big impact on my father? The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. So my dad was a senior in high school. That happened in April. My dad graduates in June. He goes to my grandfather and says, Pops, because that's what he called my grandfather. He said, Pops, I want to do something about the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And Pops, my grandfather, said, great, do it someplace else. And so my father goes off to college, his freshman year in college, and he joins a group called the Black Panthers. Now, I don't know what you know about Black Panthers or what you think you know about Black Panthers, but primarily they were a political party that was designed to pull poor people out of poverty, and specifically black people, black poor people out of poverty. They also recognized and understood their constitutional right to bear arms, and those two things made them a very dangerous group to folks who did not understand that they understood what was going on. And so as a result of that, so he came equipped with the black leather jacket, standard issue beret and afro, and he joined the revolution. And then in 1970, the most amazing, beautiful thing that could ever happen to my father happened. And he realizes that the revolution does not have a health care provision. And that the retirement plan for revolutionaries sucks. And so he leaves the revolution and he gets a call from God. Now, what do when you get a call from God? You answer, right? I was in one session and someone said, you run. I said, sir, what's your name? He said, Jonah. I said, I get it, right? So he answers this call from God, and God calls him to be a fire and brimstone, Bible-thumping preacher. Hallelujah, yeah! So I am my father's son. So in this presentation, if it feels like I'm preaching, it's not my fault. I am my father's son. And if it feels like it's a little bit political, because it is. If you wonder what my position on my political leaning is, I will tell you this very succinctly and very plainly. My leaning is on the Constitution of the United States. That's my political party. And so if you're with that, if you're standing up for that, then we certainly won't have any disagreements, right? How that gets played out may be something we can talk about. All right? So, again, my name is Andre Koen. Excited to be here. Just drove up from Rochester, Minnesota, where I am the program director for diversity and inclusion down at the Mayo Clinic. And so I took the day off to come up here and work with some of the finest folks who do the hardest jobs. So and I'll share this. My daughter was born premature at 31 weeks. So she's just a little tiny peanut, about 5 pounds. And I stand on watch for her because she has acid reflux. And so if she were to fall asleep and regurgitate, she might choke on the stuff. So my wife and I, we take turns and whatnot. And I was equating that. I was just thinking about the reason I stand watch, right? And then I thought about other people who also stand watch for different kinds of reasons and how they stand watch. And so the thin blue line between chaos and order is an important job to maintain. And I appreciate all of us who stand on watch. So I can't imagine the sleepless nights that you've had at some point in your career standing watch on my behalf. And when that little girl gets bigger, I'm gonna laugh at every demand that she makes because I paid the price for her to be there. And I can understand the frustration that sometimes those of us who hold up liberty as the standard and stave off chaos and disorder get flustered when people have something to say about something that they haven't protected. So we'll talk more about that kind of stuff later. So on your handout, there are 5 dots. What I'd like you to do is to put one thing that you value or that's important to you next to each one of those dots.
Do you have any more handouts?
I do not.
We'll share.
Or you can just take a piece of paper and draw 5 dots.
Okay.
Classes keep getting bigger. One thing that you value in each of those, next to each one of those dots. It could be a person, it could be a place, a thing, it could be a concept, justice, freedom. Simple word association that you value or find important. All right, what I'd like to do is play a game, and the game is very simple. What I want you to do is I want you to find a minimum of 2 people for each of the things that you wrote down, and I want them to sign on things that they either agree with or have something that is similar to what you have. So either they say, wow, I like that. Trent had this. Oh, I like what Trent had. So let me sign on what Trent had. Or something that's similar, all right? So a minimum of 2 signatures for each one means you'll have how many signatures at a minimum? 10. You have a minimum of 10 signatures. You have 90 seconds to do that starting now.
That's why I work with that.
I didn't put vacation on there. What I agree with? You have. All right.
60 seconds.
You want to pray? All right.
Four, three, two, one, and game over. Get over here. Finish him. Scorpion wins. So cool. As you were, did everyone at least get one person to sign on your paper? Okay, cool. As you were going around the room, were there things you saw in other people's papers and you were like, oh man, why didn't I write that down? That was a really good one. I should have wrote that down. What were some of those things? Health. All right. What was another? Community. One more. Integrity. All right. Please count up all of your signatures. And was there anyone that was able to at least get a minimum, at least get 5? Anybody have at least 5 signatures? Raise your hand if you have 5 signatures. All right. 7 signatures. All right, cool. More than 7 signatures. Shout out the numbers. 11. I got 11. 21. Somebody's a cheater. No, it's not like that. In every group, there's an overachiever, overcompensating for something. No, just teasing. All right, good. Let's give her a hand for 21. All right. No, what was the clap thing that you tapped? I saw that. I heard that. What was that? Like 4 people clapped at the same time, like that. You know? Oh, it's a coincidence. All right, cool. Now maybe it was an inside thing. I wanted to be on the inside. All right, cool. Were there certain things that were hard to find people to sign on, or you actually didn't find anybody to sign on one of those? Is there something that was you got fewer numbers, or it's harder to find? What was one of those? Communication, all right. Please raise your hand if you value communication, even if you don't do it well. Like, I don't communicate so well, but I value it, right? What's another thing that was difficult to find or have someone sign on? Or maybe it's your fewest, the one with the fewest signatures.
I had the pursuit of happiness, but Keith agreed to sign it.
All right, cool. The pursuit of happiness. If you value that as a concept or an idea, a pursuit of happiness. All right, cool. I personally like to have it, but if you want to chase it, that's cool too. Right? One more thing. One more thing that was either difficult or it was one of the fewest things you had the fewest signatures. Money! Please raise your hand if you value the tool called money, not necessarily the money itself, but you like that as a tool to be able to get, borrow, and trade. Raise your hand if you value money as a tool for trading and borrowing. So, what do you think is the purpose of this activity? Like, why would we start with this activity? To find common value. Right? Why else? So recognizing, even though it wasn't something that was on your list, it was still something that you valued, right? Do you value more than 5 things? Right? Yeah, of course you do, right? So this is just a small snapshot of the larger picture of things that you value. So to look at our commonalities, and what else do you think we could gather from this? That we also have differences, right? So I'd like for you to write this somewhere on that piece of paper, a definition of diversity that I'm finding more helpful than the one that was given to me. That diversity is the recognition and honoring of our commonalities and our differences simultaneously. So it is our differences and our commonalities, right? All too often, people have thought about or concentrated on one of those aspects, but not very often have we talked about those in concert with each other. We are more alike than we're different, and I would suggest that our differences are optical illusions. Optical illusions. Artificial barriers to authentic human relationships, right? So I remember National Night Out, right? So I'm at in the parking lot, and I was at a booth for community mediation and restorative services, and you have referred lots of folks to that program, and I appreciate it, and mediated with community members in ways that have helped grow the community and circumvented, in a lot of cases, getting into the judicial system, right? So I appreciate that. So I'm at the booth, and again, we're much more alike than we are different. And so I'm standing at the booth, and I'm hanging out, and this like unassuming white guy comes up, and you know, there's a lot of white guys that would come up and talk to me and at the booth. And this unassuming white guy comes up and we start chatting and whatnot. And I don't know how it happened, but I said my name. I think he asked me my name, and I said Andre Koen, and he goes, Andre Koen, and I was like, yeah. He was like, I love your stuff, and I was like, my stuff? He was like, yeah, I get newsletters and trainings from you on a regular basis and all this kind of stuff. And I said, and sir, who are you? And he said, I'm the chief of police. And I was like, oh, Aaron! You know, I was just like, I was so shocked. It was so cool, right? So we are a lot more alike than we are different, and our differences are optical illusions. You ever played that Kevin Bacon game, right? 7 degrees, 6 degrees of separation. I would suggest that we're probably less than 7, more like 3. Because we're much more alike than we are different. But how do we explain our so-called differences, right? So one thing I will suggest to you is that there's a gambit or a game being played on us. And let's go back to those things you wrote down as values, right? So I want you to look at those values, those 5 things that you wrote down. We recognize that you value many more than that, but we just wrote down 5. And I want you to tell me, is there anything there that I could look at and say, and know what your ethnic or racial group is based on one of those values? Is there any one value there that I could look at and say, I know that they're whatever, right? Okay, so most people are shaking their heads no, and that's fair, right? Is there anything there that would specifically identify one's gender identity or gender expression? Is there one there? No? Okay, cool. Is there anything of those 5 values that would indicate one's socioeconomic status or your tax bracket? Is there anything there that would signify those things? No. Okay. Why is that? Why did your racial identity or your gender expression, gender identity, or your socioeconomic status, why did those things not come up as things that you wrote down? Guess what? Yeah. Because you wrote down universal ideas and values. All right? Why else? Why else? It's inherent to human nature. Because you're smart. You're smart. What did I ask you to write down? What did I ask you to write down? Yeah. 5 things that who values? You. 5 things you value, right? Now, what I'm not suggesting is that our racial identities or our gender identities or gender expression or socioeconomic status aren't important. I'm not saying they're not important. What I am suggesting is that the things that you wrote down are more important than those other things, right? Because as human beings, we want many of the same things. We want similar things. But how we get them may be very different based on a number of things. Right? I want you to know that I am as human as you are. But I also have a different position in this society that had nothing to do with what you did or what I did. Did you know that I was not born black? It's not a reverse Michael Jackson thing. I'm good. I'm healthy, right? When I was born in 1970 in Dayton, Ohio, there were 3 racial categories for the nurse to choose from: black, white, and other. And so the nurse looks at my parents, she looks at me, she looks at her list, she looks at me, she looks at her parents, she looks at her list, and she makes a decision. And what decision do you think she makes? What do you think? Black. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? But here's my question. Before she made a decision, before she checked the box, what was I? I was born human, but America made me black. Did you know my grandfather wasn't black? He was colored. Did you know his grandfather wasn't colored? He was Negro. Did you know that the racial categories in the United States are not the same as the racial categories in Canada, or Mexico, or Central America, or Brazil? If I took a Ford F-150 and placed it any place on the planet, all things considered, would it still be a Ford F-150? Yeah, all things considered, right? I like using Ford F-150 because I'm trying to get one. I walked up to the dealership because I saw it. I was like, I want to get one of these trucks. So I was like, people are just buying these trucks. I went up, and he told me what it cost. I said, I'll be back. So I just lift the door handle and I'll be back. Why is a Ford F-150, no matter where you place it on the planet, why is it the same? Because it's real. It's how it was made.
And it probably doesn't know.
What's that? Oh, is he a Chevy dude? Oh. Did you try to do a found on the road dead kind of comment there? Okay. So at any rate, so we have to recognize that there are games being played that sometimes we play a part in that, right? So, for example, did you know that there are no Hispanics in Mexico? There are no Hispanics in Cuba, no Hispanics in Spain, no Hispanics in Belize, no Hispanics in Puerto Rico. Where do Hispanics live? Where do they live? In the United States. They become Hispanic when they come here. But back in Cuba, what am I? I'm Cuban. And Puerto Rico is one of the United States. They get confused about that, right? So there are no Hispanics, except for Cuba. Right? So that's important to recognize. So that's my introduction. So I just started my introduction, and it should be pretty clear that I'm prepared. I have an agenda, I have handouts, we've got stuff we're going to go through. But I would be remiss if I did not ask you what you wanted to talk about. What burning issues do you have, or questions do you have, or things that you like to discuss that will be helpful to you in doing your work? So the floor is open. So what kinds of things were you hoping we might talk about, or would you like to talk about, given the time that we have?
I'll go with one.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the Ford.
What's that?
There's a Ford F-150 to start. So when you go somewhere, is it a red Ford F-150 or a black Ford F-150? Is that who's fast?
Yeah.
In any way that it's looked differently, it's still F-150, but it's still a colored F-150.
I don't know, does the color impact the function of the Ford F-150?
Red, whatever, blue,
So the function should still be the same. I expect it to still function the same, right? I guess I'm not clear on what the question was. It's a great observation.
No, it's, when you say that, like, we're born human and stuff, but like, the government makes us black or white or other, or the United States does, but it's like, and then you say Ford F-150, but those are designated color also. That doesn't mean it's bad or different, I guess, it's just what it is.
I think we're on the same page.
I'm hoping.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments, observations? What would you like to talk about? Questions?
Well, I guess one thing that I would like is, so we're gonna talk about how we would believe in their value, but our ultimate goal is, right?
Yeah.
How do we fix it? When we walk out the store, what are we gonna take with us?
Yep. So ultimately, we'll talk about how to fix that. And you already know the answer to that. You already know how to fix it, right? So if I'm not mistaken, the previous session this morning was talking about your brain and how it functions, right? So there's the limbic system, there's the mammalian system, and then there is the prefrontal cortex, right? And the limbic system handles what? What gets handled by the limbic? At its core, so basic stuff like breathing and eye reflexes and all that kind of stuff, right? So the basic stuff. And what does that limbic brain look for, do, or take in? It primarily has two roles, right? To survive, and part of that survival is through procreation, right? And it's also looking for danger. Is it possible that our brains could be responding to danger that doesn't exist? I don't know about you, but sometimes I have anxiety attacks when I'm in traffic, and so right up here, like 694 and 100 during rush hour, and it just kind of, traffic just kind of, and it's slow, and I get this reflux. I mean, it's not reflux, but I get this reaction that says danger, but there's no danger present. I just feel like it, right? So to answer your question, when we talk about this idea of diversity and cultural competence and all that kind of stuff, we already know what to do. The problem is we don't trust ourselves in doing it. We have to recognize that our brain does something, and we have to take responsibility for what our brain is doing. We have to shape and mold our brain, right? Because what is our genus and species? What's our genus and species? We are Homo sapien. Sapien. We are Homo sapien sapien. The ones who know they exist. We eat knowledge. We eat knowledge, right? Anyone have those, I think I have one. Have these devices with the Apple logo. Do you know what that means? You know what that logo means? Why did you say Apple? And it's a particular kind of apple. It's not necessarily a Macintosh apple, but there's an importance of the positionality of the apple. Is it a whole apple? No. It's an apple with a bite out of it. What do they suggest to you when you purchase that icon? That you are eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That you're eating knowledge. Right? And so, to your point, we have to figure out how to remember what we know to be true, right? When you were a kid, what did your parents tell you about interacting with other people? What's that? Respect others. What else did they say? Be kind. Right. This is really simple stuff. But for some reason, when we get old, it becomes more difficult to do because we have more excuses why we can't do those things. But we'll get to those. We'll get to some real practical stuff too. Right. All right. So those are some things we want to talk about. Any other things we want to talk about? All right. Let's flip that coin. What are some things that you hope we're not going to talk about? Like, there's some stuff, if we talk about this one more time, my head will explode. I do not want to hear this anymore.
The assumption that we already have a bias all the time.
So you don't want to hear about that? No. Okay. Yes. Oh, your hand went up.
But, no, I didn't, but I'll say the assumption that we have a bias.
Yeah, so I will say that I won't keep repeating it, but I will say it, that we do have a bias. And we all have a bias. I'll even go out a little further. We're all racist. Every last single one of us. The question isn't, do we have a bias or do we not have a bias? Is it whether we are racist or not racist? The question is, what do you do with your bias? What do you do with your racism? What do you do with your power? What do you do with your privilege? We all have it. It's a part of, I would say it's no more disproportionate than anyone else, but I will say that the ramifications show up differently with us than they oftentimes do with the everyday Joe. There are certain things I expect from us. When I'm in danger, I expect you guys to come in knowing what to do to help me with that situation more so than I do my neighbor Joe. Right? So there are certain expectations that what did Ben Parker say? Great power comes great responsibility, right? Didn't even trivialize that, but important stuff, right? So yeah, no, I would say it's not disproportionate, it's a responsibility is disproportionate. Cool. Other things you don't want to hear us talk about. All right, I promise not to talk about the president or Congress or any of that stuff either. Okay, so that's a gift. I'm giving that to you. Right? So we won't talk about those. All right, cool. So let's get to the rest of this stuff. So, in that center circle, in the larger circle, this is the pie of all human knowledge. What I'd like you to do is cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is. So in that circle, cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is. All knowledge, all history, all science. All right? And just humor me. Even if it's just a line, just humor me. All right? So what are some things you know for sure? What's something you know for sure? That it's sunny out, right? Somebody else said they're tired. What's one more thing? Let's look at 3 things. Something you know for sure. It's Monday. All right? So those are the 3 things. What I want you to do now is to cut a second piece of pie. And this piece of pie is the size of what you are aware of that you do not know. What you know, you don't know. For example, I know that I don't know Mandarin Chinese. I know that I don't know that. I also know that I don't know how to fly an airplane, and I now know that I should stop going to a Bible. So what you know now, what you know you don't know. Now some of you will say, well, that's the rest of the pie. What I want to say is, let's make that quantifiable, because there's a third piece that we're going to address. All right? So you have what you know, you have what you know you don't know. And what are some examples? Give me 3 examples of things you know you don't know. the Mandarin Chinese. So please raise your hand if you also know you don't know Mandarin Chinese. One. All right, something else. That you know you don't know.
Your home address.
Your home address. You know, right, you know, but you can find out. Because if you can, I want people to find me. That's how I get it. All right, so my home address, right? And probably something that someone else is doing on another part of the world, right? We don't know exactly what they're doing in another part of the world, right? So there are things we know, things we know we don't know. And what do you think that third piece of pie is? Things you don't know, or your blind spot. So write those two words in that third piece of pie, blind spot. So you have what you know, you have what you know you don't know, and you have your blind spot. If we put all three of those together, we might call those things a paradigm. Paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me, right? So paradigm. And how many people have heard someone talk about, we need a paradigm shift? Let's change our paradigm. When people are saying this, using this word paradigm, what do they mean? What are they talking about? What are they talking about? Change what we know, what we think we know, change our philosophy. Paradigm. What's that? Our perspective, right? I like to use a little phrase, the way we see the world, or our worldview, right? So our paradigm is how we see the world. Now, whose responsibility was it to introduce us to our first set of paradigms? Our parents, our guardians, those people who nurtured us, those communities we developed in, right? So they gave us their paradigm. And where did those folks get their paradigm? Probably from their parents or their community or their group. And where did that group get their paradigm? From the same, right? Has anyone ever received a copy of 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 a copy? When it's been copied or duplicated, we used to say in my day, Xerox. When it's been copied that many times, does it look just like the original? No. How is it different from the original? So it can be faded, it can be blurry, it can be added things added notes, or I don't know if you've ever seen it, hairs or dust particles or stuff, right? So it doesn't look exactly like the original. So is it possible that the paradigms we've been given, have a huge missing piece? I would suggest that probably so. There are groups of people who refer to Brazil nuts by another name. For those of you who don't know Brazil nuts, they're about an inch or 2 inches long, hard mahogany nut, kind of like an orange wedge, right? And they typically appear in Western society right around kind of fall or Christmas, winter holiday time, whatever. And they're hard and they're wooden. And actually, it's not a nut, it's a seed, which I thought was very interesting. This hard thing is a seed. And some people call them by another name. Anybody ever heard people refer to them by? Okay. Cool. So some of you look blank or don't know what I'm talking about. And so the words that we used to describe those were nigger toes. So they would refer to those nuts as nigger toes. And I'm not sure who invented that, or if they were podiatrists or whatnot, or what they thought. But I've never seen black people's toes that look like that. So I just think that's interesting. And in my family, that's not ever anything we call them. Right? So I just think that's funny. But those people who called it that, did they do that because they made that up? Probably not, right? They probably grew up in an environment and in a surrounding, in a community, in a, a time that said that that's okay to say it like that. But if we find our loved ones saying that now, particularly in a public setting or in a large group format, what do we say to them about that?
Hey, you pass those.
What do we say to them about that? Yeah, we say, oh, Grandma, no, it's not acceptable here, right? You can do that at home, Grandma, but we can't do it here. Right? It's not acceptable, right? Why? Because the context has changed. I want to submit to you that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. We don't see it as it is, we see it as we are. And so those biases that we have are important for us to check. Not because we should be bias-free, but we should know the ones we have. We should know the ones we have. All right, here's an example. At the bottom of your page, how many triangles are in that diagram? When you have a number of triangles, please yell it out. When you have a number, yell it out. 11. I hear 11 triangles. Because I have a different number than 11. Okay, let's see, I heard 11, I hear 2, 8. You say 1. Or you say 0. Wait a minute. How is it that we can have somebody saying 11, somebody saying 2, 8, and then I have somebody saying 0? We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. What constitutes a triangle? 3 sides. Please look at that diagram as it was presented to you. And is there any shape in there that has 3 sides? We bring our biases with us, right? The interesting thing about that neocortex, the limbic system, and the lizard brain and the mammalian brain, is that if we don't have answers, our brain is not satisfied with that. Our brain creates answers. And sometimes they can be the wrong answers, right? So it's not about whether you have this, that, or the other thing. It's what do you do with it, all right? What do you do with it? So let me just go over these basic truths if you go to page 2, and then we'll take a short break, all right? So part of my basic supposition is that life is hard. Life is hard. My little baby, life is hard. She was born in a traumatic thing. We're moving, down to Rochester. We moved Saturday morning. My wife's water breaks Saturday afternoon. My daughter is born on Monday. Life is hard. Go 5 pounds. But what makes life beautiful? Navigating the difficulties of life. That's what makes life beautiful. Life is really simple. It is moving from here to there. As a species, that's all we've ever done. And I find it so interesting when people say, well, I'm 100%... Well, that's interesting because your ancestors came from here and went there, and somebody else's ancestors went from here to there. I think it's interesting that Hannibal, the great African king, rode his elephants from North Africa all the way up into Scandinavia, and he left more than animal dung. So I think that's interesting. I'm 100%. Okay, cool. So we're moving from here to there. And what I would like to have you think about is, what were some of the obstacles? Wherever your here was, and wherever your there is, What might be some obstacles that came up for you as you were moving from here to there? And we'll come back to that exercise in just a second, but I want you to think about that. That life is really about moving from here to there. And why do I move there? Why movement at all? Why do I move there? As a species, why do we move at all? What about change? So we did it because there was something different. What else? Why else did we move? What's that? To evolve, to change, right? So wherever here is, it's too small. How many of you have moved out of your parents' house? I would imagine. Well, I didn't mean to put anybody out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean this. Oh, I'll pick another metaphor next time. No, I moved out because there was too small, and my ear was too small, so I needed to move there, right? And I would suggest that is true for all of us. That we move because we have to move. And the human nature is about movement. It's not about being stagnant, right? So we'll clarify that more in just a second. So here are some truths about human beings. Human beings can learn, change, and grow. True? True, right? Now here's the trick to the truth about that. Do you have to see the evidence of the change? And I would suggest that you don't. My most frustrating times as a middle school teacher was when I was looking to see the change on my schedule. I've been teaching these kids this thing, and they should have gotten it by now. So I have two middle schoolers who are now adults, and they have found each other, and they've married, and now they have children, and I watch them raise these children in via Facebook, through social media, and every now and then they'll pop me a note or they'll say something, and it's so funny to hear things that I've said to them show back up in a post that they, and I'm sure I wasn't the only influence on them, but it is interesting just to hear those kind of things come back, right? And so if I had given up on them, learning the lessons that I wanted them to learn, I would be defeated, right? So we don't have to see evidence of it. When you plant a seed in the ground, do you check it every 5 minutes? No, because you know that the process works, right? So all human beings, so next is, people do what they think works even when what? People do what they think works even when what? Even when it doesn't work. That's the great thing about criminals. They keep running the scam, and they keep running the scam until they get caught. And why do they get caught? Arrogance. Right? So we're like, yeah, this thing is going to happen. It's going to work just like it always has. Right? People do what they think works even when it doesn't. You ever seen a kid fall out in the store? Usually in the candy aisle, cereal aisle, the checkout aisle, right? I make the assumption that that's not the kid's first time falling out. And why do you think they're falling out? It worked in the past. I'm guilty of that as a parent myself, right? I'm like, okay, whatever, kid, here, right? And then what I don't understand is that I'm feeding that bad behavior, so now she's acting up even more because she was like, well, maybe I'm not acting up enough. But maybe it's just going to be taken up a notch, right? So all human behavior is also goal-directed, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And the attitude is a reaction to a goal. Please raise your hand if you have a teenager in your life or you remember being a teenager. Okay, cool. So, has a situation ever gone down like this in your interactions with a teenager? Teenager runs into the house and says, Mom, Dad, I just got a text. Cindy's having a party. It starts in 5 minutes. Can you drop me off? Anybody ever had a similar situation kind of happen? What would any reasonable adult say to that kind of request? No, you can't do that. As a matter of fact, not only can you not go, but you haven't cleaned your room all week. You and your brother and sister have been arguing. No, you can't go. What happens to the kid's attitude? Right? So the kid storms off to their room, I hate, and close the door like they own the joint, right? And then the adult is like, you know what, I did unleash on this kid, and it transferred all the stress onto this kid. Cindy has really bad acne, and it's good that my kid wants to be friends, and, so, you know what, okay. So the parent knocks on the kid's door. What do you want? You can go to Cindy's party, can't stay the whole time, I'll drop you off, I'll pick you up, we got other stuff to do, so get your stuff, let's go. What happens to the kid's attitude? It gets better. So what is an attitude? So what is an attitude, or what determines an attitude? I heard it already, say it loud. Your goal. So when people are acting out, too often we get sucked into their acting out. And we don't ask, what is the goal of this behavior? Right? So teacher middle school, anybody here an RSO, school resource officer? Okay, cool. So you can back me up on this, right? So two kids got beef with one another, right? That was the word back in the day. I don't know what they call it today. But they have a problem with one another, right? So kid, what's your name, sir? Keith. So Keith is back there. I got a problem with Keith. I see Keith in the hallway. And I'm like, Keith, yeah, and your mama, right? Because that's fighting stuff right there, right? And Keith has got something to say. Yeah, he's like, yeah, your mama too. And me and Keith are like this far apart. Right? And we're just rah, rah, rah. And then all of a sudden, other people start getting into the room. And then, and then his people are backing him up, and my people are backing me up. And so now they're pushing us like closer together. And then I start getting more. Yeah, you better be lucky. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And all the time, with all this behavior, there's no adults around, right? And so I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get you. Your butt is mine. And I'm making all this commotion. And then all of a sudden the adults show up. And what happens when the adults show up? All hell breaks loose, right? And the adults are trying to separate them, and they're doing all this stuff. The whole time, what are the kids yelling? When they could have been just boxing and knocking it out. What are they doing with their behavior? They're saying, please help me. My mouth has got me in a situation that my butt can't get me out of. Right? So we get caught up into these dances. And so when we think about human behavior, when we walk into a scene and people are heated, or they're stressed, or they're crying, but too often we get sucked into the behavior, but we don't ask what's the goal of this behavior. And I will short circuit all of that stuff for you, and then we'll take a break. That all human behavior is goal directed, and there are three goals that human beings typically are after. We're all looking for significance. We want to be recognized for our contribution, not only to our groups, but to society and to the people we value. So we want people to recognize that we have purpose and we have power. We were born for a reason, that we can do something with that, right? Significance. Second is this idea of belonging. I want to be in relationships with people who understand my significance. I want to be in relationships with people who understand my significance. I would imagine that the people that you call friends oftentimes understand your significance and your importance, sometimes more than your own family. Belonging. And lastly, I want to be physically, mentally, socially, spiritually safe to be in relationships with people who understand my purpose, right? So why do kids join gangs? What are they after? What are they looking for? Safety, significance, or belonging. A combination of those things, or one of those things, but that's what they're after, right? So the thing that I like, and people sometimes poo-poo things like a PALS program or coffee with a cob and that kind of stuff, and I don't poo-poo those things because I think those are ways to get safety significance and belonging. If you could show a kid a different way to get safety significance and belonging and not join by not joining a gang, I bet they would take it. I bet they would take it. Find it interesting. So Chief Blair Anderson up in St. Cloud was doing some stuff that I thought was kind of weird. I was like, you're a cop. Why are you doing this stuff? Right? He does, in the summertime, he partners with some other community organizations, and they have noontime lunches at the headquarters of the police department. They do a lunch program. I was like, what does that have to do with whatever? He said, Andre, think about it. If they're with us, where are they not? Right? He said, if they're with us, where are they not? And if we're feeding them, what might they think about us? As opposed to people who aren't feeding them. I was like, brilliant! For community investment, right? Community development. So, safety significance is belonging. Why do we come to work every day? I mean, all things considered, right? Why do we go to work? I wonder if those values that you put on the front either are the result of the receipt of safety significance and belonging, or are the result of having safety significance and belonging. We all want very similar things, but how we go about those is very different. We'll talk about that after the break. I'll give you 5 minutes. 5 good? 6? 5? All right, 5 minutes.
Well, that's the thing. We're going in, don't bring cars. I went in from the.
All right, let's bring it in. So here's a couple of quotes from a guy I've been reading recently. His name is Jordan Peterson. I don't know if anyone's been reading him at all. Interesting guy, a lightning rod of controversy, but I like this book. So so this idea that life is hard. To stand up straight with your shoulders back is to accept the terrible responsibility of life with eyes wide open. It means decidingly to voluntarily transform the chaos of potential into the realities of habitable order. It means adopting the burden of self-conscious vulnerability, and accepting the end of the unconscious paradise of childhood, where finitude and morality are only dimly comprehended. It means willingly undertaking the sacrifices necessary to generate a productive and meaningful reality. It means acting to please God in the ancient language. Jordan Peterson, life is hard, right? Navigating life is beautiful. Some people denigrate into hell of resentment and the hatred of being. Most refuse to do so despite their suffering and disappointment and losses and inadequacies and ugliness. And again, that's the miracle for those who are able to see it. So life is hard, but we can carve out a life out of that. Okay? So let's go down the back to page 2. So we talked about the 3 things that people are after: safety, significance, and belonging, and that we all want similar things, but how we go about getting those things may in fact be very different. So I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about our paradigm so that can inform how we do this former thing that Jordan Peterson has suggested? How do we voluntarily walk into things with eyes wide open? So at the bottom of page 2, there is a chart. And I want you to respond to this chart in a very particular kind of way. The groups on the left side have tried to share information or give you information about groups across the top. And I want you to tell me what they did, but I want you to tell me in a particular way how they did that, all right? So if the groups on the left, like parents and family, friends, school and workplace, TV, movies, and media, and from your personal experience, if they tried to give you positive information about groups across the top, I want you to put a plus. If they tried to give you negative information, if they were sharing negative information, I want you to put a minus. If it was never anything that you talked about, I want you to put a 0. All right? So pluses, minuses, and zeros. So as an example, parents and family, what did they teach you about Native Americans? Pluses, minuses, or zeros. TV and movies, what did they teach you about LGBT? School and workplace, what did they teach you about your race or your ethnicity or your gender? All right? So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to do that. Pluses, minuses, and zeros. You may begin. Four, three, two, one, and what I'd like you to do is to grab a table partner or elbow partner and just talk about your pluses, minuses, and zeros. And I'll give, if you can get in the groups of 3 or 4, I'll give about a minute apiece. We'll come back in about 5 minutes. Pluses, minuses, and zeros. Yeah, your experience in school.
I didn't get it. That's
Four, three, two, one. And thank you so much. You know, I don't think Colorado win. Yesterday, did they win yesterday? I know Wisconsin beat at least by 10. So something's not right with the matrix. Like Ohio State's not supposed to lose this early. Cool. So as you were talking about your pluses, minuses, and zeros, what came up for you as you were going through the process of putting pluses, minuses, and zeros? What came up for you as you were thinking about this stuff? It was hard to label things just as pluses or minuses. Okay. Other thoughts? a lot of energy in the room. That was all like.
2 years early on in life and then later on.
Okay, so you had 2 tiers. So you were looking at it both ways. Okay, it's kind of hard to look at it from.
What did they do early on?
Yeah, so what did they do early on, and then what are they doing currently or later in life? All right. Other folks, what did you notice about yourself as you were trying to do that? Trying to find a specific experience. So you're trying to find a specific experience. And were you able to do that, or what was it? So for most of us, were there specific conversations where our family said, "Do not go there, Simba. Do not go to the cave." You know, to the. You remember that? Did your parents ever have that specific conversation? I imagine many of them didn't. Certainly mine did. Maybe you were when you were a kid. So how do we get some of those messages? Either positive, negative. Yes, we'll get to the zeros of this stuff. CNN. So CNN, right? CNN and Fox News, right? And I'm trying to be in the middle, buddy. All right? Let me play the center, all right? So, so from news outlets. Now, that's interesting that you would say that, because I remember the time when the news was the news, and we all shared the same news, because if Walter Cronkite said it, it was. Period. Now, what do we find now? If you want to believe that the earth is flat, you can find all sorts of information that will support you understanding that the world is flat. If you think that the earth is hollow, guess what? You can find sources that will support you with a hollow earth theory. If you believe that the earth is round, guess what? You're probably in the minority, because those other two seem to just be growing by leaps and bounds. No, just joking, right? But to your point, when you look at your TV, movies, and media, how did your paper show up? What did you find there in that category? Lots of positives, negatives, zeros. What did you see in that area, in that category? You had almost all negatives. Anybody else have lots of negatives in those? Okay. Why specifically might people find lots of negatives in those areas, in that particular column? Rating. Say more about that.
It seems like it.
So TV, movies, and media are trying to attract attention, right? They're trying to get, and for what purpose? Money. From who? Advertising, right? So I don't care, if you want, CNN, Fox News, American Online News, or Huffington Post or whatever. No matter who it is, they're all after ratings. They're all after ratings. So we have to be mindful that the news that we're getting may not necessarily be news, but it might just be candy for our ears. Might be candy for our ears. So you know what I do on a regular basis? To go back to the question, what do we do? If I hear something over here and they say, well, this is true, I go over here to see if I see something that either supports that or contradicts it, because I want to be a balanced individual. I want to be a thinking person. Somebody asked me, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? I said, I'm a thinker. And we're dangerous. So I counterbalance it. When you engage, suspects or whatever, do you just take one person's word for the thing if you have other sources available? No, for the most part, we go and check out multiple sources, right? So just recognize that our TV, movies, and media. What do we know about zeros? So if we're not talking about something, what do we know? What did the triangle experience teach us about when we don't talk about things? We fill in the gaps. We fill in the gaps. We make stuff up. And sometimes it's true, which is why we keep making it up. But sometimes it's not true. I think it's interesting that, and many of you probably heard this story before, 3 generations of women are cooking a holiday meal, and the mother's in there, like she's hacking this meat, cutting it, trying to cut it in half, right? And the daughter walks in and she sees this fiasco, and she's like, Mom, what are you doing? And the mother says, I'm cutting the meat in half. And the daughter says, I see that, but why? She said, because, it makes the juices tender, and it helps the meat and the flow and all this stuff. And the daughter's not buying this, and so she keeps pressing the mother, and the mother gets frustrated. And she says, well, go ask your grandmother. And so the young lady goes to her grandmother and says, Grandmother, Mom is in the kitchen cutting the meat in half. And the grandmother says, no, she's not. And she said, yes, she is. And she said, she told me to ask you why she's doing it. And the grandmother said, because I did it. And now the daughter's like really confused. She's like, Grandma, why did you do it? And she said, baby, that's the only way it would fit in the oven. So now the mother has an oven that's big enough for this meat, but because she's just replicating stuff, she doesn't even know why she's cutting it in half. I wonder for us, if we look at these pluses, minuses, and zeros, do we really know why we have or don't have or think or act towards other people the way other people have told us to do, told us to interact? How many of us use a slide rule? How many of us know what a slide rule is? Right? We don't use slide rules because we have Google. Google, what's the calculation of da-da-da-da-da-da? Google tells us, right? Technology has changed. So the things that we used to do, we don't have to do. Did you know that they used to laugh at people they said you could never put kids in seatbelts. They wouldn't go for it. Kids just wouldn't go for seatbelts. Do you know what my daughter says to me when we get in the car? Dad, put on your seatbelt. And she's like, I got mine. So the way we used to interact, we don't have to interact that way, right? Pluses, minuses, and zeros. And so what I'd like you to do is to look at that and say to yourself, are there places where I have minuses that I don't want to have minuses? Are there places that I don't have any information at all? And how do I get information? Because if I don't get information, then I end up making it up. Or what's worse is somebody will tell me what they want me to know about that thing. If I don't go search the information myself, right? So important stuff. If we go over to page 3, this idea of cognitive control. So a person is walking down the hallways of the OEC. Is that what this is? The OEC? EOC. Okay, EOC. Walking down the hallway, and another coworker slaps him on the bottom, and they're not on the softball team together. What do we call that? Harassment, right? Or sexual harassment. What happens after that person makes a complaint? What happens next? What happens next? An investigation, and if the person that was perpetrated on doesn't like how the city is going with their investigation, they can get their own attorney, and it starts a whole big hullabaloo, right? And so, what if the person who did it, the person who did it, says during this whole process, right? The investigation is going on, and the person says, "You can't take a joke." I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking. Does that change anything? Does it change anything? Nothing. The investigation will still go on and things will still happen. Why? We are measuring the impact, not the intent. Right? So we're measuring the impact, not the intention. So impact, when we are acting out, impact is what gets measured. So part of my concern with talking about implicit bias and all that kind of stuff is that we don't get to talk about the impact. Because we spend a lot of time focusing on well, I'll come back. So the second part is this intention. When do intentions matter? When do intentions matter? What's that?
55, so we can do grant.
Okay.
Our job is, what do you have?
Your job is to prove intent. When do intentions matter? All right. So any of you ever given or received a macaroni sculpture? Finger paints, received or given, right? Where do those things go? What's that? In the trash, okay. So before they go in the trash, is there any place that they hang out for at least? She's heartless. She's such a realist, right? So where do they hang out before they go to the trash? On the refrigerator, right? And why do they go in the refrigerator? Because they're what? They're important. But why are they important? Because of, to your point, the intention, right? The intention. So when we're in relationship, that's when intentions matter. When we're not in relationships, intentions don't matter, right? So an example. So we talk about like, how do we have better police and community interactions? So one of the things that I learned from Chief Nadeau, who was at Columbia Heights, I think now he's at Maplewood. Great guy, love him. And was working with him in Columbia Heights with a Hispanic population. The church, a number of the people in the church felt like the Columbia Heights police, they got them confused with ICE. This was before, ICE was like exploded and all that kind of stuff. But they thought they got them confused with ICE, and then they also felt like the police were targeting them because they were Hispanic. And so we had all these community interactions and that kind of stuff. And one lady from Brooklyn Center stood up, and she was Liberian. She was mad and just kind of human and all this kind of stuff. And she said, I call the police and they come to my house and they are screaming and yelling and shouting and da 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 da. And so she's going off and she's mad about that. And so the officer, one of the officers listened to her, let her speak, and he helped me understand how police work happens, right? So he asked her, he said, ma'am, were you in control of the situation when you called her? And she said, no. He said, can you tell us what was happening? My boys, they were doing this. And he said, you were not in control. And she said, yes. He said, ma'am, when we show up, when you call us because the situation is outside of your control. And unfortunately, you can't be too upset if we have a particular way of taking control in that situation. And I sat back and I was like, I never thought of it like that, right? So if something's out of my control, whatever. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting about that was that Chief Nadeau's folks had a very similar situation, and what they did as a follow-up, because they understood the impact, right? So families are traumatized, it was something that had to be done. It wasn't anything that they did wrong. It was the job. And then he sent a group of folks back a week later. How was everything? We know that thing went down. It was traumatic. How was everybody? How are things moving forward? Right? Because he wanted to build that relationship with that same folks that had that traumatic impact. So we know that impact, so when we're able to build relationships, then that's when our intentions matter. Right? So at the bottom of page 3 is a car. Does that car have blind spots? Can you put an X by each of the blind spots that car has? And if I had a Hummer there, the whole thing would be a blind spot, right? Are those blind spots your fault? Are those blind spots your fault? For the car that you drive? For the rental car that you own? Are they your fault? Maybe. I would suggest not. I don't think any of us are in the design teams for any of the cars that we drive. And all cars have blind spots. They may be a little bit different in a little bit slightly different places, but they all have blind spots. But when we take that rental car out, are the blind spots in that rental car the same as our blind spots in the car we drive every day? No, they're not. But what do we say about those blind spots in that rental car? What are we saying about those blind spots? They are not our fault, but we're saying what? We will take responsibility for them. So whatever you're in that chart, whatever you know you don't know, or whatever is a blind spot for you, is not your fault. But now that we are at the age of accountability, it is now our responsibility. So if I know that I have Hmong folks in my community, and I don't know anything about Hmong folk, is that my fault? No, it's not my fault. And what else? It's my responsibility to find out, right? It's my responsibility to find out. With blind spots, there's 2 ways to find out about blind spots. What's one way to find out about a blind spot? I can crash, I can have an accident. What's another way to find out about a blind spot? What do we encourage our young people who start to drive? What do we want them to do first? Inspect the car. Check the mirror. Look for your blind spot. Look for things that you don't know exist, because that's the only way that you'll find them. Look for your blind spot. A woman asked me, she said, Andre, how do I teach my daughter about diversity stuff? And her daughter was 3 years old. And I just smiled at the woman, and I said, quite simply, you don't. You don't teach children about diversity stuff. You show them. You show them. One thing I would like to lay on you is, unfortunately, as police officers, we don't have the opportunity, we don't have the luxury of being off. We don't have the luxury of being off. Our life demonstrates our values. Our life demonstrates our values. It's funny, there was some, I won't name the place, but there were some officers who were in a different state, in a different city, who said some things about their leadership, where they came from. It got back to social media, and those folks were dismissed because it wasn't in line with the values of the organization. They were off, right? So our life demonstrates our values. So let's talk a little bit about it. So many of us have seen the iceberg theory of culture. Anybody seen that? Right? So the 10% above the water and the 90% below. What I'd like to offer you is something called the carrot of culture. And so it's broken into 2 parts. There's the things you can see and the things that you can't see. We'll call this the greens. We'll call this the root. Right? What do the greens do for the root? What do the greens do for the root? They provide nutrients. Where do they get those nutrients? From the sun, right? So they take in the nutrients and they supply those nutrients to the roots. And what does the root do for the carrot? For the top. So it takes in the water from the ground and it feeds it up, and so there's a symbiotic relationship between these two things, right? They need each other to survive, right? So if we look at this in terms of culture, we'll call this green part, let's call this an artifact. And it's something that you can see. So what are some examples of artifacts of cultures? What are some artifacts? Things that you can see about a culture? Their wardrobe, their dress, right? Whether it's traditional attire, or whether it's some kind of uniform, you can see their dress or their attire. What else can you see about a culture that's an artifact? Cultural celebrations, right? And along with those cultural celebrations usually is what? Food, right? So different foods, different music and celebrations, and right? So all of those things are artifacts. And those are the things that we can see. Below that are the things that we can't see, and we call those values. Right? So the artifacts and the values have a symbiotic relationship. So when I see an artifact, what do I know that artifact is connected to? Values. So when I see a woman in a hijab, outside of being an excellent fashion statement, what is also a statement of? Values. When I see kids sagging their pants, whether I like the fashion statement or not, what is that a statement of for them? Values. So if I come against someone's artifact, what am I actually coming against? Their values. So what if I told you that one of your values was unacceptable, those 5 things that you wrote down, or I was going to take one of those things from you? What kind of relationship would we have? If I'm going to take one of your values, or I don't think it's an adequate value or a good value, what kind of relationship are we going to have? Oh, what's that? A bad one, right? We're going to have animosity. And so what I would suggest is that if we recognize that artifacts are attached to values, that when we see an artifact, we have to recognize at the core of that value are 3 things. Safety, significance, and belonging. So people are manifesting an artifact based on their values, and those values are around trying to get safety, significance, and belonging. So do I have to understand exactly what an artifact means to know that it has value? I open that question to you, right? So when I see an artifact, I have to recognize that has value. The clothes that you are wearing today, you had choices to wear other things, but you chose what you're wearing today because it provided you, for today, safety, significance, and belonging, right? You could have made other choices. What's that?
Did you say my clothes is?
Yes. Yeah. Because you could have chosen other things, right?
My stuff is clean, that's all I grab.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that too. So do your neighbors. They're like, yes, I'm glad he's picking clean.
None of those things down. I'm not wearing cultural attire that defines me as here's what my values are.
I challenge you on that.
Okay, I accept the challenge. The lights are out, you open the thing, and you're the first sweatshirt that was there. Right. Yep, I didn't know what it looked like.
Be all right with that. But I would go the extra step and say that every piece of clothing that you have, okay, let's put it like this. No, I'm not going to put it out. I'll put it like this. Every piece of clothing that you have is a manifestation of your value. And I would imagine there's some articles of clothing that you don't have. No. The clothes, okay, I don't want to get caught up in the minutia because the clothes are just they're a symbol of something else. going back to my original statement, all human behaviors go correct. We don't have any behaviors that we do that are accidental. They are all guided towards getting taken significantly wrong. And that goes to the socks that we choose. Because there are other socks that we don't choose, right? So I don't want to get into that minutia. But I do want you to recognize that if that is not true, then what is left? Right? So if we're not consciously making decisions, what's left? If I'm not accountable for my behaviors, what's left?
I think that there's a context for it. There's a big spectrum there. My behavior has nothing to do with what I'm married to. But when I chose to work with this training today, or when I choose to wear my daily life tomorrow, has nothing to do with my attitude, my performance,
Please hold on to that. Please hold on to that mindset, right? Because if that's true about you, then it should be true about people in the hood with sagging pants, right?
But I'll also say, if me as a police officer, I'm contacting a guy that's a hoodie or a guy with a hoodie and a pants tag, which one committed the crime? Which one was suspect in the incident? That's all I'm here for. I don't care what you're wearing. It doesn't mean just because you're wearing those things that I expected you to get X, Y, and Z.
I'm glad. I hope I'll hold that. I think that's a good thing.
I would say that for the majority of the people that are in here, that's how neighborhood police department operates. We don't just target people because their pants are baggy and they're in our jurisdiction.
Yep, and I
Realize that happens in other places, but not here.
So, yeah. So one thing to put this in the real context, I mean, part of the reason that we're here and that there's this push to do these kinds of trainings is because of what happens at the Orlando Casino, right? I mean, keep point out. And what was the defining factor for the stop, or as it's been talked about, particularly in popular media, right? His wide nose. That's the thing that people key in on, was that he was stopped because of his wide nose. That had nothing to do with the content of his character. It had very little to do with other things, and that's how in popular media that it's talked about. And so, no, I appreciate that Maple Grove police operate with that level of integrity and whatnot. What I also recognize is that there are other departments where that doesn't necessarily happen, right? So I know of, and I won't speak specifically about where this was, but an incident where a neighbor, a nosy neighbor nonetheless, called police on, so it's 10 o'clock in the morning, and he called the police that someone was stealing patio furniture. And I don't know about you, but I think criminals are, they try to be smart. I don't know that 10 o'clock in the morning stealing patio furniture is something that folks want to do. And so they described the folks in a particular kind of way, and people descended on the thing with maximum integrity. And so I was talking with Chief Anderson, and up in St. Cloud, and I asked him, is this a familiar thing? And so one of the reports was that what ended up happening was these were teenagers that were doing their dad told them, but the neighbor didn't think they should be in that neighborhood, and because the neighbor knew. And so the law enforcement agency descended on these two teenagers, and the teenagers said they couldn't hear what the officers were saying because there were so many command voices. And all they knew was to put their hands up and fall to the front. And I wonder what is scary to think that if they hadn't done that, if they didn't know to do it, what could have transpired. So So, with all earnesty, I appreciate the integrity. At the same time, what we do recognize is that officers like myself, and probably more so, we battle one monster every day, and it's called cynicism. As I get older, that's the biggest thing. I'm not battling old age, because it's going to come and I'm going to lose, but I'm battling cynicism. So how do I not be cynical in my everyday activities? And so, yeah, I see that. This idea of culture, when I see an artifact, I have to know that it is speaking data. Let's go over to these last set of pages, and we'll be pretty close about it. So, I would submit that, contrary to some of my colleagues, I believe that equality and equity can sometimes be problematic, and I don't mind being quoted as saying that. I think they are both noble. Equality is making sure everyone has the same thing, so making sure everyone has shoes is an important thing. Equity is making sure people have shoes that fit. Yeah. But if you look at those three diagrams, where can we become most effective? In that last diagram, where does effectiveness show up? I would say in the third panel, where we take away the obstacles, right? We take away the obstacles. So right here on the in this picture, I have a that's my daughter. And people say, well, why do you put your daughter in there? I said, when you do your presentation, you can put whatever you want in your presentation, right? So that's my daughter. That's my oldest daughter, Phoebe, and her sister's name is Penny. And it's really interesting. So when we were in the hospital, the nurse, there was a kid in the hospital named Knowledge. And the nurse was like, his name is Knowledge? I was like, yeah. She's like, isn't that a strange name? I was like, well, it's not a name I would choose, but it's spelled correctly, you know, it's good, you know. And so she said, well, my daughter's name is Kennedy. And I was like, really? So my immature daughter's name is Kennedy. And we spell it Kennedy. And the woman was like, oh, we spell ours Kennedy. I said, Kennedy? And she said, no, it's Kennedy. But this is the same woman who is talking about knowledge being a strange name, and she spells Kennedy wrong, right? So she can't see the twig in her own eye or see this other thing. So when we're talking about this preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States who order for a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and security of blessings and liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Declaration of Independence, paragraph 2, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Anybody else get a warm fuzzy when you read those words? Anybody else? All right. Love it. Love those words. I love the United States of America. I love my family. But I can say some things about my cousins that you should not. Don't you talk about my cousins. Okay? And so because I love this great country, I can also hold her accountable to the things that she said. So 1776, the Declaration of Independence is the ink is drying. As the ink is drying, what is simultaneously happening? Transatlantic slave trade is happening. What else is happening? Westward expansion. Land from American Indians, right? Taking land from American Indians. I think it's interesting that the Boston Tea Party happened under a false pretense. What's the false pretense of the Boston Tea Party? They dumped the tea into the sea to protest King George and the taxes, but they did it how? Dressed like Indians under false pretenses, right? Interesting. So when we talk about this, the Declaration of Independence, well, we're also, who else is not included in that? One could contextualize and say, women aren't in that. I would also suggest that the people who could participate and vote, who were they that could vote at that particular time? White men, but it's a specific group of white men. Landowners. Was that the majority or the minority of white men in the early colonies? It was a minority, right? So the majority of the people, even in the colonies, as this stuff, could not even participate in these great things. So when we talk about this idea of social justice, or we talk about all sorts of stuff, I know that Adam Smith talks about beneficence, that justice is beneficence. And when he talks about that, is that we do things not because the government tells us to do, but we do them because they're good for other people and they're good for us. And so bringing people into having this life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is good for all of us, not because the government says so, but because it is good for us. This is this idea of intersectionality. So we don't. So part of the problem is that we don't have to adjust bars or change bars. We just have to take bars away that don't make sense for us. Right? And then this idea of intersectionality is just a data point to make sure that what we're doing is what we want to be doing. Right? So an example is pay equity. What's the conversation that people typically have about pay equity? How does that? People say a man makes what? $1 and a woman makes less than $1, right? So 76 cents. So that's how that conversation usually starts. But that's not the entirety of that doesn't give us a clear picture of what's going on with pay equity, right? When we start adding dimensions of race, or we start adding dimensions of education, we start adding additional dimensions, then we can actually see what is creating the pay gap between men and women. It is not just gender, but it is other things as well that creates this pay gap. And then ultimately, we should be moving from what's wrong with you to what has happened to you. That we're all constantly trying to overcome the difficulties of life. And that there's nothing wrong with us, but things have happened to us to make us think and act in a particular kind of way. Right? So this carrot metaphor works if you're in the Midwest and you're a gardener. But if you're in the Southwest, the cactus metaphor might be a better version of that. Why? Because context changes everything. Cultures are changing with their context. So as context changes, so does culture. So if you're seeing shifts in culture, you have to recognize that there are probably shifts in the context that are also changing. An example, there will come a time when men and women, all human beings, will use the same restroom at the same time. That will happen. It already does. Where do we do that? In our own homes, right? And so, however you feel about that, and the thing that I think is interesting is just thinking about men and women being in the same space at the same time. For some of us, may be so outrageous that we don't necessarily see that happening. But in fact, that's exactly how people felt about having mixed rooms, having different races in the same spaces, right? So context changes, and so does our behavior as a result. Lastly, on page 7, So how do we make change? One way I suggest is this idea of this concept of cognitive behavior therapy. And cognitive behavior therapy suggests that our thoughts plus our emotions dictate our behaviors, right? So there are three concepts that I'd like to just talk about in the short time that we have, and that's bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination. What is bigotry? What is bigotry? What are some examples of bigotry? You ever seen some on TV? Who's America's favorite bigot? Anybody grew up in the Archie Bunker, right? And what were the characteristics of Archie Bunker? Like why do people say he was a bigot? Anybody know? Anybody between more than us? Anybody else know who Archie Bunker is? Right? All right. Cool. So Archie Bunker was kind of he was opinionated. He had some experience with life, but he knew how life was supposed to go and what people were supposed to be, right? And so people loved Archie for two reasons. So that show, Norman Lear was actually surprised by the success of the show because he thought that Archie was so divisive. What he didn't recognize is that there were tons of people who agreed with Archie and they watched the show, and then there are other people who thought that Archie was a caricature of other folks, and so they watched the show for comedy purposes. So they had these two folks watching the show. And one of the things that I recognize about bigoted people is that I used to think that bigotry was a lack of information or a lack of knowledge. And so I would give bigoted people information and say, no, that's not what it is. Here's some statistics, here's some data. And then finally, a bigoted person rose up and out of their frustration and said, Andre, I don't care what you say. This is how I feel. And I said, oh, I know what bigotry is. Bigotry is an emotional state. And so how do you help someone shift their emotional state? Allophilia. Allophilia. A feeling of positive regard. You love a bigot. You love a bigot. You don't necessarily have to put up with their bigotry, but you tether yourself in such a way that you say, Uncle Jim, Aunt Sue, I know that you think this way. I don't like it when you talk like that around my kids, but we're still family, and I'm going to keep you on a tether. Let's stay attached. Anybody had a family member who had some kind of obscure bad behavior, and family members decided to cut them off? Anybody ever have that happen? For those of us who have had that happen, did they get those people say, oh, you know what, you cut me off, I should change my ways? No, they get worse. One thing I would encourage you to think about is that people who you think have negative behaviors or thoughts, is it possible they could be coming to you because moths are drawn to light? Is it possible that they're looking at the light in your life? Next is this idea of prejudice. Prejudice is a closing thought. What I'd encourage you is to get people to think. Get people to think. Think. If we can think, we can be human. We're not thinking if we're not doing. And then lastly is this idea of discrimination. The law said it will take care of discrimination. If someone touches you in the wrong way, if they don't allow you to have the same access as somebody else, we have processes that will take care of it. And so the law will take care of the behaviors. Who has to take care of people's thoughts and emotions? We do. And so on the back page on page 8, I encourage you to look at some ways to expand your own horizons, to think more critically. The last thing I'll leave you with is you don't have to believe everything that I say, but I at least want you to think about what I say. My name is Andre Koen. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
You're a police senior, get back there. I see. Seniority is all that matters. Seniority is all I got is the. Just sipping.
We're ready.
Sorry. We're not.
There or there?
Actually, first you have to see LaDonna and get registered.
Oh, all right.
She's not ready yet either.
That's okay.
Jeff, quit pushing the workers. Let them get their job done. Jeez, Jeff. Such a pusher.
I'll call you up.
Looks like the line.
All right, actually, the language this way goes that way. How's that?
See, don't see next to the chair.
Sure.
There you go.